What is the most common commandment in the Bible? This is a question I often put to churches and congregations and to PCCs, and I get lots and lots of different answers. People say it's about love or obeying the commandments or all kinds of different things that people say. But the actual answer to this question is this. The most common commandment in the Bible is do not be afraid. I understand that commandment appears 366 times in the biblical text, one for each day of the year, even on a leap year. Yet at the moment, we are living through times when fear and anxiety are very much present around us. There are lots of reasons for fear going on at the moment. We face the cost of living crisis, for example. Our energy bills are going up. There's the continuing anxiety of the war in Ukraine. And we know that we've just been through an autumn of political instability and uncertainty. And all these are real. And they are reasons why around us all the time at the moment, there is great anxiety. And that's true in the world. It's also true in the church. For we know that since COVID, many of us have diminished congregations. We've less people in church than there were before 2020. And the pandemic has had a particular impact upon our ministry to families and young people. So there are good reasons for this being a time of anxiety. What happens when we experience such a time? What happens when we are afraid? We can respond in lots of different ways. We can respond in self-protection. We can respond in panic. We can want to step back from our normal engagement with the world and go into retreat. Sometimes when we are fearful or anxious, we can be angry. And there can sometimes be a tendency for us to want to finger point and blame. All these are ways in which we respond to fear. But to give a scriptural perspective on this, I would like us to look at some of the verses of just one book of the Bible. And the book I have in mind is the first letter of John. Now, let me explain why I think this is what would be a good text for us to look at. 1 John was written to a community that was divided and in crisis. You will be heartened, I think, to learn that this time parish share was not the cause. Rather, in 1 John's time, false prophets were around who were denying the incarnation of Jesus. They were saying that Jesus wasn't really real, that he wasn't really human. And within the community to whom John was writing, these false prophets were getting a bit of an edge. And people were turning from the true faith and leaving the numbers of Orthodox believers depleted. So it was a really tough time when 1 John was being written. So how does John in his letter respond to this situation of anxiety and fear that he's facing? He doesn't go in for retreat or anger or any of the common responses to fear that we see. Instead, what he did was to write to the people he was caring for and to call them to love and mutuality. Let me just read you some of the verses of this beautiful letter. I guess you'll know some of them well. So in 1 John 4:18, John says this: "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear." Again, in 1 John 3:18, he says, "Let us love not in word or speech, but in truth and action." And then finally, in 1 John 3:16, he says, "We know love by this, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another." We do live in challenging times. I don't think any of us are seeking to say that that's not the case. But our call in challenging times, and our calling, is to respond not in fear, but out of love. It's to respond not just in words or speech, but by truth and action. I think what I take most of all from 1 John is the greatest call upon us is to respond in mutuality and togetherness, not in fragmentation and self-care. All of us have a part in the other as the parishes together of our diocese. So what might this mutuality in action look like? I hope that mutuality tonight, as we meet together, will be in listening to each other and in naming our fears. What precisely are the challenges we face as churches and parishes and schools and chaplaincies of our diocese during this very difficult period through which we're living? I hope mutuality will mean asking each other's questions and growing in understanding. That seems to me to be the very opposite of the retreat that fear often builds within us, and anxiety too. I hope that mutuality will mean encouraging each other and seeking responses that are creative and life-giving. And I hope that mutuality will mean understanding ourselves to be part of a greater whole. None of us on this Zoom call, none of us in our parishes or chaplaincies or schools are isolated units. We're not alone, we are together. And there should, I think, have been one final bullet point on this slide, which is I hope that mutuality will mean that no matter what we face, when we are together, we can respond in trust and hope and faith. Because that must be the lesson of 1 John, I reckon. Because if that community to whom he wrote had not won through, we'd never have read their letter. And yet here it is, in our Bible, there to encourage us, there to will us on, there to stand with us, no matter what are the times we face.